Have you ever felt like your world was collapsing from the inside out? Like every emotion was louder than your thoughts, and no amount of logic could tame the storm? That chaos, emotional, raw, unrelenting, may not be your enemy. In fact, it might be your greatest teacher. Stay with me, because by the end of this journey, you may come to see that the pain you've been running from holds the very purpose you were born to live out. What if your breakdown was the beginning of your becoming? When the individual finds themselves drowning in emotional upheaval, it is tempting to believe something has gone terribly wrong. We are conditioned to equate suffering with failure, as though inner unrest signals a deviation from the path rather than a sacred part of it. But what if the storm within is not chaos at all, but rather a deeply meaningful process, the psyche, attempt to wake us from the illusions we have unconsciously built? Emotional turmoil is not an accident. It is a message, a symbolic language through which the unconscious seeks integration with the conscious mind. Most people run from this message, labeling it as disorder, anxiety, depression, or weakness. But this rejection only intensifies the symptoms. Because what we resist within ourselves does not disappear, it festers, it mutates, and eventually, it erupts. In moments of intense internal suffering, something ancient and primal stirs beneath the surface. The soul begins to cry out, not in words, but through emotions that seem disproportionate, erratic, and overwhelming. But these emotions are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be listened to. They are signposts. What hurts points. It points to where we are out of alignment, where we have betrayed the self to maintain an image, a persona, a role that no longer fits. If you look deeply, you will see that emotional turmoil often comes at the intersection of stagnation and transformation. It appears when you are about to outgrow a life you thought was yours. Something dies in you, not to destroy you but to give birth to a deeper truth. The psyche speaks in paradoxes. What appears as suffering may in fact be a disguised invitation to wholeness. A call not to escape your emotions, but to dialogue with them. The question is not, how do I get rid of this pain? But what is this pain trying to reveal? And often, the answer lies buried in the very place we fear to look, in the shadow. This is where chaos originates, not from outside forces alone, but from the suppressed, exiled dimensions of our own being. These aspects rejected by the ego, ignored by the persona, grow restless in the unconscious. They manifest as emotional turbulence until we are forced to acknowledge them. Here lies the root of much of our suffering. The split between who we think we are and who we truly are. The persona is a necessary social mask, a construct that allows us to function in the world. But it becomes dangerous when we begin to believe it is the whole truth of our identity. Over time, we grow attached to the mask, to being seen as competent, kind, respectable, successful, whatever values we have chosen to project. But these projections are often disconnected from the full reality of our inner life. We suppress anger to appear peaceful. We hide fear to appear strong. We deny sadness to appear resilient. And this inner conflict between the image we present and the truth we carry becomes unbearable. The more rigid the persona, the more violent the backlash from the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is merely unlived potential. It contains not just our repressed vices, but also our dormant virtues. The courage we buried to stay safe. The creativity we silenced to be practical. The assertiveness we denied to be liked. Emotional chaos often signals that the shadow is awakening, pushing into consciousness, to be integrated. It is not enough to manage emotions with temporary techniques or surface-level affirmations. The real work lies in reconciliation, acknowledging what we have exiled within ourselves, and offering it a place at the table of consciousness. Without this inner integration, the chaos will repeat. It may change form, moving from anxiety to depression, from rage to numbness, but its core message will remain unheard. Every time you feel like you're falling apart, you must ask, who is falling apart? Is it the real self, or the mask that no longer serves you? When you feel lost, perhaps it is not that you are without direction, but that the map you've been following was never yours to begin with. The suffering that emerges in emotional turmoil is often the pain of birthing a more authentic self. And birth is never clean, never painless. It is bloody, primal, and sacred. The same is true for psychological rebirth. It demands that you let go of the old structures, the outdated beliefs, the false identities, the inherited narratives. It asks you to step into the unknown, to face the discomfort of ambiguity, and to trust that what feels like death may be the beginning of deeper life. At the heart of this transformation is the soul's desire to be seen and heard. The soul does not speak in logic or reason. It speaks in symbols, in feelings, in dreams, and yes, sometimes in emotional breakdowns. What we call a nervous collapse might be the psyche's final plea for attention, its desperate attempt to stop you from continuing down a path that is killing your spirit. We ignore these messages at great cost. The longer we silence the soul, the more violent its expression becomes. That is why turmoil must be honored, not feared. It is sacred unrest, a divine disturbance. And if you have the courage to sit with it, to enter into conversation with your pain, you will begin to hear something more than just suffering. You will begin to hear guidance. We live in a culture obsessed with order, with control, with appearances. But the psyche does not care for appearances. It cares for wholeness. And sometimes, to bring us into wholeness, it must break down everything that is false. Emotional turmoil is often the dismantling of a house built on sand. It hurts because we thought the structure was solid. But in truth, it was never real. And now, the soul wants to build something new, something rooted in authenticity, in truth, in meaning. But to build, we must first demolish. To create space for clarity, chaos must clear the ground. And in that chaos, something beautiful begins to happen. Once you stop resisting the pain and begin to feel it fully without judgment, without shame, you start to see its intelligence. You realize that the emotions were not random attacks, but precise signals. You realize that the discomfort is not a flaw, but a compass. And you realize that the pain you feared was actually the path you needed to walk all along. The road to clarity does not bypass suffering, it travels through it. In this process, something else emerges. The soul begins to speak more clearly. You begin to sense what is real, what is false, what must be released, and what must be reclaimed. You become more attuned to your inner landscape, more honest about your needs, and more courageous in your decisions. The fog of confusion starts to lift, not because the world has changed, but because you have changed. You are no longer at war with yourself. You are listening. You are integrating. And as this inner coherence deepens, external clarity naturally follows. But to reach this point, you must endure the darkness. You must pass through the valley of the unknown. You must face your own shadow without flinching. It is not easy work. It is the hardest work there is. But it is also the most rewarding, because what waits on the other side is not just relief from suffering. It's rebirth into a life aligned with your deepest truth. And that truth cannot be given to you by others. It must be uncovered, excavated from the ruins of your former self-doubt. This is why emotional turmoil is not the end. It is the beginning, the sacred threshold, the point at which the false self begins to crack, and the real self begins to emerge. Not polished, not perfect, but real, alive, whole. The chaos you fear may be the very doorway to the clarity you crave, but you will never know unless you walk through it, unless you choose to trust the process rather than escape it. Trust that your pain is intelligent. Trust that your emotions are messengers. Trust that your soul knows the way. And as you do, you will begin to see that the divine is not absent in your chaos, it is hidden within it, waiting for you to listen. The greatest illusion of modern life is the belief that clarity must come before we act, that peace must precede transformation, and that healing requires the absence of pain. Yet, the deeper we go into the human psyche, the more we realize that the truth is rarely clean or comfortable. Clarity does not arrive like a sudden light switched on in a dark room. It emerges slowly, as a revelation earned through confrontation with chaos. The inner world is not governed by linear logic, but by symbols, paradoxes, and patterns that must be felt before they can be understood. And it is within chaos, not outside of it, that those patterns begin to form, like stars emerging from the blackest sky. Chaos is not the enemy of clarity, it is its womb. When you stop fearing emotional turmoil and start engaging with it, something remarkable begins to happen. You begin to transform chaos into wisdom, not by controlling it, but by dialoguing with it. You begin to see how each overwhelming emotion, each breakdown, each wave of anxiety is actually a fragment of yourself returning home. These emotions are not senseless. They are revelations. They show you the places within where you have been unconscious, where you have denied your truth, ignored your limits, abandoned your voice. The turmoil is not senseless noise. It is coded communication. It is the soul attempting to bring the unconscious to light so you may no longer live as a stranger to yourself. In alchemy, the chaotic phase is known as nigredo, the blackening, the disintegration of old forms. It is the necessary destruction of the impure, the false, the unexamined. This is not merely a metaphor, it is a psychological necessity. When we enter emotional chaos, we are stepping into our own nigredo, whether we know it or not. And what we feel as collapse is actually the psyche dismantling its own illusions. We are being asked to relinquish our attachment to what no longer serves our growth, even if we once built our identity around it. The process is painful because the ego resists annihilation. It fears losing control, losing coherence, losing face. But the soul does not fear these things. The soul longs for truth, even when that truth is disruptive. It is through this alchemical chaos that something more whole, more real, more enduring can be born within you. This is why those who have walked through deep emotional suffering often carry an unshakable wisdom, knowing that is not taught in books, but earned in the crucible of lived experience. They have been initiated into the deeper mysteries of life. They have died many psychological deaths and been reborn. They have discovered that chaos is not to be feared but revered, for it is the raw material from which the most meaningful life is forged. There is a divine intelligence at work even in your darkest hour, but it does not speak in the language of certainty. It speaks in symbols, in synchronicities, in dreams, and in inner tremors that shake the foundations of your false self. When you begin to observe this pattern, you will see it not only in your personal life but mirrored throughout the cosmos. Nature itself operates in cycles of chaos, and order. Forests burn so that new life can emerge. Rivers flood so that dry lands may be nourished. Stars explode so that galaxies may be born. Why, then, would we expect our own inner lives to be any different? The destruction of one psychic structure is the prerequisite for the birth of another, but unlike nature, we resist these cycles. We fear the loss of control. We fear the unknown. We cling to the familiar, even when it is killing us. And so, suffering deepens until we finally surrender. This surrender is not resignation. It is trust. Trust that beneath the disorder is a deeper order, one that our conscious minds may not yet perceive. There is a sacred pattern unfolding, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. When your plans collapse, when your identity fractures, when the future dissolves into fog, something greater is often trying to emerge. That emergence cannot happen without disruption. It cannot happen without breaking the mold of who you were, so that you may become who you truly are. Divine order is not neat. It is not always comforting, but it is always precise. It takes immense courage to believe this while standing in the midst of your chaos. And yet, that is the moment when faith becomes real, not faith in religion necessarily, but faith in meaning, in the deep structure of the psyche, in the wisdom of your own becoming. The divine speaks through patterns, not prescriptions. It calls not to your intellect, but to your inner knowing. And if you still yourself, if you learn to listen not with your ears, but with your soul, you will begin to sense that something sacred is guiding your transformation, even in your confusion, especially in your confusion. Those who are able to endure this process without retreating into superficiality or distraction discover something profound on the other side. The emergence of a self that is not only clearer, but more integrated, more resilient, and more capable of embodying purpose. Clarity, in this sense, is not the sudden absence of difficulty, is the capacity to hold complexity without being undone by it. It is the birth of a consciousness that can see the order within disorder, the meaning within suffering, the guidance within pain. This is not the clarity of simplicity. It is the clarity of depth, and it is available only to those who have walked through the fires of emotional transformation. As you continue on this journey, you may notice that the clarity you once sought, outside in validation, in success, in approval, begins to emerge from within. This inner clarity is not loud. It is quiet and unwavering. It does not depend on circumstance. It arises from having faced yourself fully, from having brought your shadow into the light, from having integrated the parts of you that were once scattered, hidden, or shamed. This is the clarity that allows you to live in alignment with your deepest values, to say yes when you mean yes, and no when you mean no. It is the clarity that frees you from the tyranny of performance and allows you to move with integrity. But to reach this level of wholeness, the self must continue to die and be reborn. Not once, but many times. Each layer of clarity reveals a deeper layer of complexity. Each answer gives birth to new questions. This is the rhythm of the soul's unfolding, not a straight line, but a spiral. What seems like repetition is often deepening. What seems like failure is often refinement. We are never truly finished. We are always becoming. And every time we find ourselves back in chaos, we are not regressing. We are being invited to refine our clarity even further. The self that emerges from this process is no longer naive. It has tasted suffering. It has witnessed the collapse of illusions. It has learned to navigate uncertainty without losing faith. This self knows that pain is not the end, it is a threshold. That chaos is not a void, is a womb. That the unknown is not something to be feared, is where the soul meets the divine. The individual who has faced their darkness does not become perfect, they become real. And in that reality, they are able to walk through the world, not with arrogance, but with compassion. Not with control, but with presence. Not with fear, but with meaning. This is the fruit of clarity, not certainty, but alignment. Not the elimination of suffering, but the capacity to transform it into wisdom. Not a final destination, but a deeper relationship with the mystery of life itself. And when you realize this, when you have suffered enough to stop fearing suffering, when you have lost enough to stop clinging to what cannot last, you become capable of something truly radically, become capable of living authentically. You no longer seek safety in appearances. You no longer seek clarity as escape. You seek it as embodiment. And in doing so, you become a vessel not only for your own transformation, but for the transformation of others. You become a mirror in which others see what is possible on the other side of their chaos. You become a guide not because you have no pain, but because you have walked through it with your eyes open. This is the sacred task of the soul. To descend into the depths, to confront what hides in darkness, to be dismembered by truth and reassembled by love. It is not an easy path. It is not a popular path, but it is the only path that leads to wholeness. And in walking it, you become not just a survivor of chaos, but a midwife to clarity, to meaning, to divinity made visible, through the raw, beautiful complexity of being fully human.